But like, I think if Batman was Batman full time, would he enjoy Batmaning that much?
Fundamentally, why I went back into employment was because I didn't believe in myself enough. I just didn't believe I could.
But again, like the world will tell you that you haven't been consistent with it. But when you boil it down to the core, you've been doing the same thing your entire life. When you look at how ADHD has impacted your career, is there anything that you would have done differently when you look back? Like if you knew?
Oh my God, I've not introduced. It's been like ages since I did a podcast. I'm just going to dive in. So for those of you on my YouTube channel probably don't know, I had a podcast a couple of years ago, which I have since removed and like I'm repurposing. But it's been ages since I've like interviewed, if you will, had a conversation with someone, and it's always really funny to say hi at the start of the call and have a little check in, and then you hit record, and then it's like, hello. Hello again. So, hi, welcome. We thought we'd do something a little bit different today, and I have my friend and colleague, if you want to call it colleague, working partner, inspirational business person with me today, um, Jaz. Hello, Jaz.
Rachel, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm actually going to get my little fidget thing. Oh, I think I've left it downstairs. I've realised one of the things I've got into such a good routine of is, the little stimags, these things when I'm on
Mm.
coaching calls or conversations,
I
because
was
I'm
gonna say
already
they're
aware
usually
that,
on your desk as well. I was just like, they're far.
you know what, I'll get instead. I won this at a like arcade. But yesterday I needed to clean my whiteboard and I couldn't be bothered to go downstairs and get tissue, so I used the angry side.
I feel like that's a metaphor for something.
We'll fiddle with
But I was
this.
gonna say it looks so soft, so soft.
So soft. Love it. Um, Amazing. So we thought we'd have a conversation, chat, whatnot today. I'm holding off trying to give too much away, I guess. But do you want to, I guess, to kick off? Do you want to just like introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Bit about me, yeah. So my name's Jaz Marfo. I am a career coach for goal getters, and I'm also a community manager. I love cheese, I love R&B music, and I am a recently diagnosed ADHD girly, combined type for folks who are curious.
Love it. And one of my favorite things, and I guess I can put the link to this in the description of the podcast episode where I came on your show, which would have been the
Mm,
start of 2022, I think.
yeah.
We had a really funny conversation where I was in a zone of like, okay, do what you want, live your life. I was still self-employed at this point before going back to work. And I said, I don't have ADHD, but I've been watching a lot of like YouTubers that help people with ADHD run their businesses, and it just makes sense. And we had a whole conversation about that.
On all the ways that it makes sense. And for context, folks, that episode came from like very long voice notes. It was a good ranty voice note, and it was like, people should know this stuff. And I think we actually did it live as well. We did it live on LinkedIn. I'll have to dig up the video, folks, but we'll link it.
Yes, yeah, we kept having gems. I feel like you're particularly good at the gems. Sometimes you send me voice notes and there'll be like a little quote in there or a little moment where I'm like, oh my goodness, this needs to be like an Instagram quote. This needs to be like a poster. You just got the gems in there.
Love a good gem. Love it. Look, in my past, I say past life, it's not past life. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a journalist. So words were always my first love. So yeah, sometimes I use too many words. Sometimes there's just the right amount and the right phrasing to get a message across, I guess.
I love that. And you know what? Maybe because I guess we're talking about careers today and we want to touch on like how undiagnosed ADHD has shaped our careers. Let's start there. Like when you were a kid, because I feel like that can tell you a lot about like
Mm.
who you truly are almost. Like what were your career aspirations when you were young?
Oh, there were many. Like the first one was singer. And I grew up in like the 90s. It was Spice Girls, it was Destiny's Child. It was just like, yeah, that's the cool thing to do. Um, and then I was just like, yeah, no, not going to do that. I also then realized I could just sing, right? I'd go to church and sing. I'd be part of choirs. I sang with my sister and my mom and stuff like that. So there was also that space where it's just like, actually, there are things that I thought needed to be a career that I can just do. Um, wanted to be a newsreader until I found out that they don't write what they read. Yeah, that was one of those things. And then that was just like, who writes what they read? And back then I didn't really know about like producers and stuff. So I just thought it was just journalists. I thought somewhere in the building, somebody wrote the article and you're just reading the article. So I'm going to be the journalist. And then it evolved into wanting to be an actual writer. So like I used to write short stories, poems, all of that sort of stuff. And this is probably all the way up until secondary school. And it was just the end of secondary school where you just start thinking and you're just like, what am I meant to do, etc. I knew at some point in my life I wanted to run a business, but that was because that's the example that I had around me. My dad had run his business for his entire life. He'd been self-employed. My mum had joined him in that business as secretary, etc. So in many ways, the entrepreneurial pathway was more second nature to me than the corporate. The corporate was, or corporate or anything in between, right? Whether that's public sector, working in an office, working in a store, working for someone else was like the secondary one. It was the one that I was told you were meant to do, but it wasn't the one that was exemplified in my house. And then got to college. Context, I started getting obsessed with business books from about the age of 13. It was time for work experience, and naturally I did what my dad told me to do, which is got some business cards. Went to Sunday school, went to the family and friends, handing out my business cards, telling them, I'm looking for 2 weeks work experience, etc., etc. He taught me a good handshake age 14, 15. So I think in many ways, like my pathway was biased by the entrepreneurial perspective on things, which was just you just go out and get it, go out, create it. If you want to do it, just do it, right? It was less, I wasn't brought up with the you ask permission. I was kind of brought up with the crack on, and if somebody's got something to say, then whatever, innit? So yeah, got to college, and then it was like, do I want to be an actress? Do I want to be something in business? And then got to uni and studied hospitality management. Thought I wanted to either be a hotel manager, a hotel revenue manager, or head of events and conferences, because I loved just like coordinating all the little pieces and putting people together. Squiggly career then launched from there because I was like, oh, I don't get paid enough to do this sort of stuff. I'm sleeping at the hotels. This is all just too much. So then left, took some time out, worked at an estate agent's, then was like, okay, I didn't get a degree to just like be an administrator in estate agents. And I don't mean that in any sort of offense. It was actually more of a self-talk of like what you're taught to do with certain things, right? You're like, you've got a degree. What do you mean you're working estate? Because I had the best time of my life at that estate agents. I learned so much about myself. I lived life. I traveled. I did all of that good fun stuff. But I was just like, okay, so what's the career pathway here, right? So, you have to turn it into a thing. So I then moved to work for a landed estate. So a duke who owns a huge chunk of West End, essentially, I joined the team that looked after his huge chunk of West End.
Casual
Because that
Duke.
felt, this is it. I felt a little bit more, it felt a little bit more serious. There was a pathway because I was like, okay, so there's the property administrators, which I was, then there's the property managers, and then there's the surveyors. And then that started my sort of obsession with, okay, well, the top of this tree is surveying. Spent a couple of years of my life trying to do that, then spoke to people who were qualified surveyors, because surveyors is a little bit like accounting. You have to study exams and all that stuff. So I'd started a degree. I really was dedicated to this pathway, and then spoke to people and I was like, they don't earn that much money than me, and everything that I'm doing at the moment they do, so I'm going to get a qualification to do what? Like all of it was just being very disenchanted once I got close to the real thing. I was like, it doesn't feel exciting. I am thoroughly motivated by learning. I have no shame in saying that I'm motivated by money. But learning is actually the first one. I have to learn, I have to grow. And a lot of the organizations I found myself in, they didn't prioritize that, or they promised me it and it never arrived. I also, what I'm now thinking is connected to my ADHD is if I'm not happy in a role, I have to leave. Like it's a matter of, it's like it's a full body, can't stay here anymore, don't care if I don't have anything else to go to next type vibe. I have to be out, because what I understood what I understand now was my undiagnosed ADHD, but before I interpreted it as my anxiety and depression. When I'm not unhappy, panic attacks, overwhelm, messes with the sleep, appetite goes, all of it. Then I start sabotaging my own stuff. all of it just is a downhill situation from me being in environments that weren't supportive to me, where I'm either bored out of my mind or I am being bullied. I've had that a couple of times. Or I'm just not happy. I'm not plugged in. This is not what you sold. You lied. We'll get onto that. Anyone that lies to me professionally, we out. Peace out. A-town down. I don't do that as well. So there's a lot of things where when I explain it to people, they're like, "You left for that?" I'm like, "Hell yeah!" And it's a no-brainer for me, which I'm now understanding is connected to the lovely little ADHD penchant that we have for justice and fairness.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Oh,
did
it's so
property and then had
interesting.
enough and went to tech.
Right. Oh my
Tech
God.
was
We
overwhelming, but it was the best for my freedom.
right. Oh, interesting. Okay, I want to come back to that. And I'm chuckling to myself because we were like, we'll keep this quite succinct. I'm using the free Zoom. I've only got a 40-minute limit. And now I'm like, there are so many things I want to discuss. I just want to like relate on that last point, which is well interesting because I've definitely recognized this in myself and I assume must be ADHD, which is that sense of like as soon as my heart's not in something, especially in a job, as soon as I'm like, don't believe in the cause anymore or don't feel like it's worth it, that beginning of the end sense, it's it's funny because I recognize that I start to get like I said to Mr. Rachel, even with my job last year, where I'm like, it's objectively still fine, but my heart's not in it. I go like, oh no, it's the beginning of the end. And we know this is a problem because that's when I start getting really down, really trapped. Like I can't enjoy anything else because I'm so consumed by the fact that I'm not happy where I am. And I used to cling to that so tightly and just wish it wasn't true, right? I'd be like, no, 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 we're good, we're good, we're good, keep going. It doesn't make sense. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned in this diagnosis is like, you kind of just have to accept the reality. Like, and I know that's not always that straightforward because it's not so simple for most people to just be like, oh, I'll just quit my job. But like being able to recognize that emotion and go like, it's the beginning of the end and that means something and it's important and I should take action rather than just like denying yourself that is a big one, I
Mm.
think. Mm.
The shoulds are heavy, right? Like I remember there's an uncle who probably still thinks I work in hospitality because every Christmas he goes, "How's work going? Are you still in that insert whatever he remembers me doing last?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I work in tech at the moment and I've been there for 7 years." And you, how do I say, that voice for me in my career has gotten quieter and quieter because I realize nothing bad happens when I allow myself to decide and let something not be for me, if that makes sense. It's less about a decision because that's a gut feeling. That's like an embodied response. Hell to the no, 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 can't sit here anymore. This is not my thing. But I think it's about quietening the voices that tell you should this and should that. And obviously, as much as I say, like going on without a job to go to, like anytime I've done that, like I remember the first time I did that, my dad was just like, "You live under my roof, it's not that deep. Quick, don't even go in tomorrow." Right. So I get the quote unquote from like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The roof will remain over the head. I will
Yeah.
live life, the bank balance is okay. So it's never been diving into chaos. And I definitely feel that I am privileged for that. I've always been supported in taking that decision and been
Mm.
surrounded by people because I think that's one thing I was talking to my friend about how my life would be different if I didn't have parents who believed in just being who you are and cracking on, and that's just Jaz, and she just does what she wants, and she just goes for it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I feel like if I had a different set of parents who were very much, you toe the line, you finish what you start, like there's so many things that would have been different about me as an adult, but because I was given that permission to say, I don't like this anymore, I don't want to do it, for better or worse, because there are some bits where as an adult I'm now working on the thing called discipline. It's meant that then I've gotten into a relationship and Mr. Jaz is just as supportive. So again, that's kind of changed my trajectory a lot to the point where it is just I can chase the thing that lights me up and nobody is in my life sort of poo-pooing that or going,
Yeah.
that isn't real life, part of being an adult is this, part of being an adult is that. Because like I said as well, I'm also motivated by money. So I know I haven't woken up any morning and said, I just want to volunteer and not make any money and live on the other side of the world. Can you pay my bills? It's always been, actually, I know I'm amazing at what I do when I do it.
Hmm.
So I'm
Hmm.
going to go for that. I also like nice things. I like cozy things. I like soft things. Those things cost those things
Yeah.
cost money. So usually my whims lead me to landing on my feet, which also engenders more trust from the people who are like, that's just Jaz. That's just my wife. She'll find her thing. And once she finds her thing, it'll be amazing.
Yes, yeah. And I wanted to mention that around what you said earlier with like role models and then what you said with your parents there and Mr. Jaz is
Mm.
a really interesting topic because like I know people who are older, sort of like 50s age, that have been diagnosed with ADHD that recognize the influence it's had in their life, but because they've been in a career that's largely um worked for their brains, it's almost not been as noticeable or like as problematic, right? And so there's this question of like, but then like, is it that much of an issue? And I think what's really interesting about it is that reference point of like the bubble that you grow up in. So when you said that yours was quite like entrepreneurial, that's really interesting because I kind of had the opposite in some degrees. I mean, my stepdad's self-employed, but because I was the first generation in my family to go to uni, it was like that was the focus. And I think our age group as well, like at school, I knew so many people that shouldn't have gone to uni and didn't want to go to uni, but our school was like worried about league tables and worried about like, no, we've got to get these, results um in there. And so pushed in that direction. And like you, my main motivation is learning. So I always would have gone. I'm a huge nerd for it. I love it.
Mm.
Like writing essays. It's like my favorite thing, right? But what's interesting, I think, is like I left school or even going into my A levels with this weird like tension in myself that I never thought I would amount to anything. I never thought that I like my A level results absolutely shocked me because I just assumed I wouldn't do very well. And something that I noticed even just pre-diagnosis when I was kind of approaching the 30 mark is I'm a massively creative person, but I had gone through the school system thinking that I wasn't. I genuinely, if you'd have asked me like probably up until the age of 26, 27, I'd be like, no, like I don't have good ideas. Like I can't really think creatively, which is wild to me now because I think it's actually one of the core parts of me, but I can't think it very quickly in certain situations, right? Which is like in front of loads of people on the spot under pressure. I don't think very well when I'm sat down, like when I'm off walking and getting my inspiration. Um, so I find it interesting that how it's really like great to hear your perspective from like your reference point because it just goes to show that that bubble that we grow up in can give us a different perspective normally for better and for worse on both sides, right? Like everybody has
Mm.
something that it nurtures them for and something that it kind of hinders them for. um yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think it's something that we've discussed before, where right around the time I'd just been diagnosed and then just sort of went headfirst into the meds because I was like, let's give it a go, let's see what goes, what happens. And I was like, it's amazing that my body is doing what my brain tells it to do. However, the crash was a lot for me, folks. So I chose not to continue it. And part of that decision was me realizing that I had been spending the past year prior telling people I suspect I have ADHD, including like jobs I'd interview for. So what I've realized is because I've been transparent and whether I put the label of ADHD or whether I put the label of this is what I need to thrive, this is how I work best on it, I managed to find myself in an environment that again allowed me to be me and allows me to just like sustain my job and in many ways encouraged me to. So like little things like in my role as a community manager, there's been some days where my brain is genuinely melting. And I've said to my manager at 3:30, is it okay if I leave a little bit early to like I'll make up my time, but I just feel really overwhelmed. I can't focus at the moment. I'm gonna write myself a little to-do list and just start again tomorrow. And she's just like, yeah, it's fine. Or we were in an open plan office. I let her know the first week. I was like, so I hated yesterday. I feel like I was in everyone's conversations. And for context, I'm a community manager in an organization that's part of a recruitment firm. So there's a lot of phone calls happening in this open plan office. And she was just like, is there anything that I can do? And I was just like, is it okay if I like go to other floors when it gets noisy? Like, because I'm a social person, I like being in the office. However, the overstimulation was like next level. And I also don't like sitting at a desk with my noise cancelling headphones on, because I'd rather just be at home without headphones on. So there was just a lot of different things where I realized that actually, regardless of whether I had the label of ADHD on it or not, I had shown up in the world with these things that I knew about me and told people about them so proactively that actually my life is quite friendly towards my ADHD, be it my personal life. You know, I could come home and go like, what's for dinner? It's like, oh, I don't know. Is it okay if we just get takeaway? Because I can't process it right now, you know? Or even yesterday I went to Mr. Jaz and I said, should we go back to ordering those like meal prep kits? I know like at face value they're a bit spenny, but they work out cheaper than us just doing the takeaways when I just can't face it or can't figure out. And again, you know, some of you may relate to this. The can't figure out, it's not that there isn't food in my fridge when you do food shopping, it's just there's a lot of food in my fridge and I can't compute like, should the potatoes be combined with the mince to make shepherd's pie, or should it be like mash and bangers, and how long will that take? And then bleh, all of it. So that was a big thing in adult life, realizing where the friendliness is actually present. And I'm grateful for that, and definitely acknowledge it as a privilege as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. I wanted to touch on what you mentioned with being in tech and freedom,
Mm.
because you see a lot in the world. You see a lot of this like
World.
narrative that like ADHD is entrepreneurial and we should own our own businesses and we should be self-employed. And I guess between us here, I'm full-time self-employed and you are full-time employed and self-employed. So we've got woohoo, the whole mix. And I know that that adds sometimes a bit of a weird pressure for people as to like, should I almost that very much all or nothing, right? I'm either fully employed,
Mm.
but there's various things I hate about it, or I'm self-employed, but because I have ADHD, there's various things that are hard about it. So what's your opinion on that?
Mm. I understand why it happens, because I have similar conversations with people from um I want to describe it as other minorities. So whether it's race, whether it's gender, sexuality, neurodiversity, disability, there's a lot of people that I speak to that are just like, I tried that employed thing. It never worked for me. It caused me more harm than good. So I set up my own thing. So there's a lot of it that is really circumstantial based on the relationship that you have to work and the experiences that you've had and what work looks like. But there is also a space that is a huge, big gaping hole of risk. I'm gonna be real about it, right? I have both. I love having both. I realize I can do both. I realize the reason that I've been able to do both is because my brain stays active and my business has been a thing to feed the brain, a thing to feed my hyper focus. Um, but also on the flip side, it is actually those same traits that mean that I don't do well as an entrepreneur alone without the job. I need the stability. Um, and I say that candidly from a point of view of my business makes money, but not enough to cover everything, right? So there's that sort of space where anytime that I have been fully self-employed for a couple of months, it's been that chase. And I probably say, even listening to you frame the question, it's about doing work that excites us. And because we don't find it in a workplace, we create it for ourselves.
Mm.
But and I'd love to get your 2 cents on this, because I remember when you got your last role and you were like, oh my gosh, I just be me. I can just do my thing and get paid to do my thing. And I think the biggest question to ask yourself if you're like on the fence of that is, if somebody else ran a company where I could do exactly what I want to do as an entrepreneur, would I work there?
Oh,
Is it about the
yeah.
thing, or is it about being in charge? Because some of us love being in charge. Nothing wrong with that. But is it about, I don't think I'm going to find the thing that I want to do unless I create it for myself, versus actually, I just care that I get to do it. So if you pay me to do it, cool.
Yeah. That's such a good question. And my reflexive response was, ugh, right? Which is funny because, and we might have talked about this on your podcast at the start of 2022,
Mm,
or at some point we've had a conversation where when I went back into employment from self-employment, one of the things, oh, sorry, something's just dropping into my Monzo. One of the
We love it.
things that came up, or one of the things that helped me form that decision was going, I didn't become self-employed for the sake of working for myself. I did it because there are things that I believe in and things that I want to do. So if that's the priority, what are the mediums that I can do that? And employment is one of them. And I stand behind that decision at the time. But the reason I'd had to come to that point was because after 2 years self employment in the pandemic, undiagnosed ADHD, learning everything at once, I was incredibly stressed because I couldn't do what I needed to do to earn the money. And money
Mm,
pressures are it's massive, right? It changes. I like to work mainly off kind of, obviously there's a strategy there, but the natural desire and inclination and what feels good and a bit intuitive, as soon as you've got money worries, it completely interferes with that process and you
mm,
go from that place of scarcity and it's stressful, right? So fundamentally why I went back into employment was because I didn't believe in myself enough. I just didn't believe I could. So I was like, this is not, the
yeah.
door is closed. But to your question, and there were so much things that worked for me really well in employment, but to your question, I think what I've learned about myself is I don't really like being told what to do. And
There we go.
right, that's not necessarily
There is
like
no
a,
shame. I want to be in charge of me.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, and that's not like, like, oh, fuck authority, like, I have respect for people, but there is a something that switches off in me immediately. And I think especially in a bigger corporate organization, I feel a lot like like those containers that have got like a bit like a lava lamp, but it's glitter and colors
Mm.
and stuff. I feel like I'm one of those and I've been shaken up, but I'm just like waiting to like blow. Like I'm just there. And for me personally within a business, there's no opportunity to like spray that glitter around because there's so many structures
Mm,
and other things and that's why I love, I guess, so far. Um Self-employment. And another part of that for me, which I was thinking about this morning actually, when when I was like I was gonna send Jaz a bit of an overview for this call or like a loose structure and I couldn't get the brain to brain. And then I was making my breakfast this morning, like talking out loud to myself about certain things. Um, which differentiates, I think, or where I haven't been able to find it works for me in a corporate or employed space is I think I've had a perception before, or people have had a perception before of me being bad at coping with uncertainty. And the whole
mm,
vibe in the corporate world, right, is like, what is it, volatile, uncertain, what's the other one? The VUCA stuff. Chaotic.
yeah.
Can't remember. But like
All
you've
that.
got to be okay with uncertainty and stuff. But I found that really hard to accept because I didn't really agree with it. And I was struggling to like find that line. And Mr. Rachel, we went for a walk and he had a genius insight for me. He said, you're really good when everything is uncertain and you are able to just go in, make sense of it all, and have control and take action. What you find really hard is when some things are uncertain within a structure where you can't figure out where you start and other people begin and what's yours and what's not yours, and the autonomy is all confusing. And I was like, oh, for one, that's really insightful.
Mm,
For two, I would have in the past perceived that as like, oh, I need to be less controlling and more collaborative. Whereas now I just go, oh yeah, good point. Like, fuck that. I'll just work for myself. Like it's like it's not that I'm being awkward or stubborn. My brain is like, give me the structure, give me the clear boundaries. And if you can't do
yeah.
that, I'm out.
Well, it's so interesting. What you just said, it probably feels like it's going to come out of left field, but it's something that I've experienced. And this is why I can only work for a particular type of company. I have that same impulse. I also say it without a doubt. I know my dad intentionally raised all of me and my siblings to be leaders. So we never shied away from taking the reins when we saw chaos around us. So when I'm in an environment where there's too much chaos, I will naturally overstep my boundaries. Like I will move into your department and set up your processes and hand them back to you. Okay. And there's some people who are really grateful for that, right? And those are the people who are like, I wish I had these processes. I wish my brain worked that way. I wish I knew the technologies, da 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 da. Thank you so much. I just never had time to do it. There are others, however, who see it and they are threatened immediately because they take it to mean that I want their job.
Right.
Because in a crisis, I will step up and step in. And it does mean there's times where I've stepped over the person who formally is in charge. I've gone toe to toe with a CEO in a meeting before. I
Wow.
will go toe to toe with the head of commercial. I will go toe to toe with whoever. If you have brought me into the room, you're going to get Jaz. So do
Yeah.
not open your mouth and go, any other thoughts? What does everyone think we should do here? If you do not want to hear me go, this message should be sent here. We should change this to this. If we reschedule this program here, we bring this into blah, blah, blah. We do, blah, blah, blah. I go into my mode and that's my magic. And if you can hack it, you hack it and we crack on. If you don't hack it, or I find myself in environments where you can't hack it, I bounce.
Mm.
Because there's also a lot of space where, for me, because I end up doing that by default, it turns me into a different version of myself that isn't
Right.
sustainable. I cannot be fixing everyone's departments when I have my own role to do. And it gets me in a little bit of trouble, like self-imposed trouble, because then people see, oh my gosh, Jaz, you've built a really great reputation for getting stuff done. Can I bring you in on this? Can I bring you in on that? And I'm like, whoopsie,
Yes. Relatable.
whoops. I showed them my superpower. Do you know what I mean? It's literally that. It's like I showed you my superpower. I shouldn't have shown you my superpower because now you want it and I'm going to end up drained and it's not going to be super anymore. It's going to feel like a job, right? It's not going to feel like, oh, a great day. I was just fixing stuff. Everything went wrong and I caught it, right? That sort of thing. Like, I don't know. I feel I watch a lot of films, but like, I think if Batman was Batman full time, would he enjoy Batmaning that much? You know, he gets to be the
You know
usual
what
version of
though?
himself. But like, if I was doing that full time, if any if Spider-Man was full-time Spider-Man, yeah, would it be
Yeah.
fun? Would we like him? Would he show up to work miserable and be like, morning, yeah, cool. You
Yes.
saving? Yeah, cat surgery? Cool, cool. Like,
But you know what? That's a really good question for people to ask themselves around, because I think a big anxiety around people of doing their passion, living out their passion as a job full time,
mm,
whether that's employed or not, is like a bit like what you said right at the start. A hobby can be just a hobby, it doesn't have to be a job. Um,
mm,
and there's that fear, I think, especially in people with ADHD. What happens when the novelty wears off, when I'm not as excited anymore? What if I end up hating the thing that I loved? And that is a valid, I guess, question or concern. I don't,
mm,
for me personally, I think how I try and see it is like novelty or interest might wear off in certain topics, but like the core of what drives that is the same. So, for
mm.
example, last year I was like, I'm going to be an illustrator. I'm going to write comic books. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to join rock choir, which I joined and I went to two and haven't not done anymore. I'm going to do all this. And
Mm.
yes, the novelty wears off and I'll quote unquote quit. But what sits behind that is creative drive,
I was
expressing
about to
myself,
say, the
right?
thing is not the thing. And again, I think it
Yeah.
goes back to the should, right? Because on the outside, like when I think about being a kid, I did ballet and I did gymnastics, didn't keep up any of them. On the surface level, I fell out, like I didn't want to do gymnastics, I didn't want to do ballet. But throughout my life, I've moved my body. I dance. Once a dancer, always a dancer. Do you know what I mean? So the thing is not actually the thing. But again, like the world will tell you that you haven't been consistent with it. But when you boil it down to the core, you've been doing the same thing your entire life. Like on my CV at the top of it, top left, I have people and processes because my career got so squiggly that I was like, I need to make it easy for people to understand me. And the bottom line is whether it was I was planning your wedding, whether I was making sure your property was ready to move in, whether I was a valuation surveyor or working in tech, it's always been people and processes. And if you get
Mm.
that about me and I get that about me, then you will get me. And also, it keeps my career open. So when I'm applying for something and somebody's like, this is a very different role to what you've done, it's like, I know, but people and processes are my thing. That's what I have
Love that.
years and years of experience in. It's not about years and years of experience in tech or years and years of experience in property or hospitality. None of that matters anymore. It is just the skill set that I bring and my passions that are still there at the core. And actually, in all honesty, the minute both of those disappear, you got a problem on your hands, mate.
Mm.
I'm out. Peace out.
I love that. It's a great way to like boil it down to the two. We have got 2 minutes and 47 seconds before we're going to get kicked out of this room. There's so much I haven't covered. Maybe we'll have to do a follow up. Ah, um, My question is going to be, is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say?
I'm gonna flip it on you. I want to know because we're having this conversation with a lot of self-knowledge and awareness about ourselves. We knew some stuff, but we didn't have the label, we didn't have the insight, we also didn't have the community. When you look at how ADHD has impacted your career, is there anything that you would have done differently when you look back? Like if you knew?
I mean, there's definitely that angle of like, you have to go on the journey, right? If I hadn't, I wouldn't be
Mm,
where I am now if I hadn't been through that. I think it would be to trust myself sooner. Because when I track back, like even when I was 24 and I quit teaching, I sorry, I'm panicked. So I've suddenly seen the time, and I'm like, oh, oh, oh. No, it's good. We got it. Quick fire.
it's all good.
When I quit teaching, that was actually it was when I discovered coaching and was asked, "What would you do if you had nothing to fear?" And I was like, "I'll leave."
Mm.
But I left not knowing what I was going to do next. And I remember at the time, my dad and my boyfriend were like, "Why don't you do like a law conversion? Like be a lawyer, like do something like that." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah," because it was all stability, structure, good creds. And I remember downloading a guide on like law conversion and reading the first paragraph and being like, nah, no, I'm so bored. I'm so bored. But that gut instinct, I say gut instinct, I mean, it's not even that. It's kind of obvious, right? It's just like, do I like this or not? But I've always had it and I can recognize it throughout my career, but I never really let myself have it. It was always then overridden with like, yeah, but, yeah, but. So I would trust myself sooner.
Yeah, love it. Mm, yeah.
I feel like we need to do a follow-up. There's so much we haven't got into, but otherwise we'd be here for like 2 hours and
Yeah, easily.
you know, nobody needs that. Everybody needs that, but nobody needs it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will link to Jazzy's stuff in the description,
Yeah.
all of her amazing things. And now I feel like I'm just waiting for this is like the longest minute ever,
I know,
waiting
it's
for it to
because
just
it says
come
less
out.
than a minute. We like decisiveness. That is so vague. Zoom is
Honestly.
really annoying to ADHD brains right now.
I want the like visual timer.
Give me a second.
And I don't want to hang up until I just feel like we've got to long it out. Oh my god, there's so many more questions that I have. No, anyway.